Hello again. The lecture you are about to watch is going to be presented by my friend and mentor, Bill Cheswick, or to those who know him, Ches. He's going to be speaking a bit about passwords and ways that we can think about them a little differently. Ches is known as the father of the internet, though he will disclaim that title, and literally wrote the book on the topic. As well, he was one of the first users and creators of Honeypot, a server that is left intentionally unprotected on a network in order to see and analyze what kind of malicious activity happens. Though Ches is now retired, he has had a long and illustrious career, including time spent in companies of his own and at Bell Labs, the source of multiple Nobel Prizes for inventions that changed the world. In his spare time, Ches also gets up to a lot of mischief, including building small pieces of technology to use on the farm where he and his wife have retired in New Jersey, produce internet maps, and of particular interest to me, he creates these amazing printouts that show an entire movie on a single large artistic print. Bill also spends time on the farm building gadgets to take care of bees, and if you are good to him, he may potentially even let you try a bit of their honey. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Bill Cheswick. Now, one slight note that I'll make is we started recording this 30 seconds late, so I will introduce his talk, Rethinking Passwords. You'll note that the first few seconds are cut off. Bill starts his presentation with a story about how he received a note from Chase telling him that there was fraud on his Amazon account and that he needed to change his password. Unfortunately, this email was fraudulent. It was a phishing scam. And so, having fallen for it, Bill realized that he needed to change his password. This is how he begins his adventure. Please enjoy.
Got it. Recording in progress. So this thing, my notes, VPO alt set late dad means something to me. It's not the password. And when you write down passwords, first tip, when you write down passwords, don't write down the password, write down a hint to yourself. My problem is that my hints have become so oblique and obscure that sometimes I forget what I wanted to say. So I needed a new password. So I went to cheswick.com/insult, which you can go to. And we'll talk a little more about that later. And it's an appalling reliquary of gouty candlefish scraps. And I said, okay, here you are, Chase. This is my new passphrase. That's 42 bits of entropy. That's a pretty strong passphrase, but it's it's longer than 8 characters, but it needs 2 letters, digits, and specials, and no space. So I tried appalling reliquary of gouty candlefish scraps with a 1. No, please follow the rules. Okay, then I start cussing the thing. A lot of passwords are people cussing out the computer. Stupid Chase 0. No. How about connect 1? Yes, that's fine. Which of course is a much weaker password. Now, those were not exactly the words I used, and I'm not giving you my password. I do have one slide in here which will show an actual password that worked at the time when I was showing the slide, and you'll see why that was okay. So Schwab let me start to compose. I said, look, I know about passwords. I'm going to give them a blast of my technical know-how because I've been dealing with passwords for 40 or 50 years, and they really need to fix this. But it turns out that a snarky message was not an approved messaging topic. What is your message about? And, things. And I said, well, I can go to LinkedIn and look up friends in Chase because I'm kind of famous in this field. And that means I've got friends in all of these companies. Maybe I could find someone at Chase and say, what are you guys doing? Or I could talk about it here. And what I really want is a token device will do it. So what's wrong with this interaction? Well, I didn't know the password rules. They didn't have the list. We'll learn more about that. They were rejected without explanation sometimes. There's a maximum length of a password. I mean, you could just take a long one and fold it on itself. That you could give it the entire Bible and that could be the password. Why is space invalid? It's the biggest key on the keyboard. What does that mean? Actually, Schwab is not a bank. Well, it is a bank now, but Schwab is a stock account. In the early days, backspace was a valid character in the early days of Unix, which is not a good idea. And a simple password, well, we'll get onto that. Okay, so let's, boom. Let us try a little thought experiment. We're going to make a bank. The Corona Savings and Loan is the trusting bank. It has no passwords. We'll bank without passwords. Okay, we get just past all the password stuff. Now, as you might imagine, that has some security problems. So no, the accountants say we have to have passwords. Okay, how about a bank with easy passwords? That, you know, I think some people would think it might work. How could we do that? Well, we're going to have a single digit password from 1 to 8. That's your password. All you got to do is remember a single digit. How would this work? There's no guessing because we have a dynamite chair you have to sit on. And if you guess wrong, the chair blows up. Okay, this tends to suppress that sort of problem. And then the question is, now the real security question, of course, is how do we store these passwords? That's really what this whole thing does. And you go back to the server, and here is a password file on the server. And we have a bunch of names and the digits they have. Well, if someone captures that file, then you've lost. The hacker could see the password and get access to the file. And this, of course, has happened many times. So what we can do is a hash function. And many of you know all about hash functions. You can chop something up into a number that is very hard to reverse, and it's very hard to make two that come to the same answer. So now the file looks like this. Liam, his 4 turns into that long number that looks like C1D1, and that's what we store in the file. So now if you're a hacker getting our banking password file, you have these things. And the only way of doing it is by running through a dictionary attack and finding what password would make one of these things, assuming you know the hash function. And we're going to talk about that. By the way, the hash I use is a 256-bit HMAC algorithm with the key Corvid savings and loan, Corona Savings and Loan. Unfortunately, the marketing and legal departments report that the dynamite chairs are problematic. We're losing customers, and how about a 4-digit password, and can we limit it to 4 tries and maybe skip the dynamite? Well, we're not going to talk about that today. So we get to pins, and here is a survey. I have the slides have a bunch of URLs in here that you can go look at stuff for the most common pins, because obviously common passwords are the ones that you would try first. 1234, 1111, 111000. You look down through this list, and none of these are particularly surprising. 4321 and so on. Looks like 4-digit pins are a bad idea, but it can work. Oh dear, oh dear. All right, but you know, I moved the picture to the wrong place. ATMs arrived in the early 1970s, back when I was in college, and they had this little card and a 4-digit pin you put in there, and you get money out of the bank. 4-digit pin, how does that work? Well, first of all, I couldn't choose my 4 digits. So the bank could say, no, 1, 2, 3, 4. But secondly, when you put the card in, and if you misguess the password a few times, it eats the card. Now, I'd like to point out that my card, I don't have it right here, now 60 years later, still has 4-digit pin. This is working. This is a 4-digit password that has been working. And if it didn't work, you can bet banks would change it. Now, in Europe, of course, they say, oh, we are much more secure. We have say 6-digit pins. So we are more secure than the Americans. But of course, the 4 digits have worked just fine. Now you can use your more secure European 6-digit pins in the United States, and they will work. But there hasn't been a big need to change it. And believe me, banks would know if there were a need to change it. But what if they get access to our password file? How do insiders get in? The 3 Bs, as I learned from the chief scientists of NSA, are burglary, bribery, and blackmail. These are threats to your security that you have to think about. It should never happen, but it often does. So a file with the password hashes is an oracle you can check and run through. You could do password guessing and find out what comes out with a hash answer. So what happens next? Here we have a password file where I chose random words from 74,000 English words. Can't tell the difference from the password file. It looks the same, right? Now what do? The words I picked were these, which are chosen at random out of a long list of valid English words. Obturator fascia for Olivia, and so on. These are pretty obscure words. And by the way, putting the hash passwords in public is something that FTP has done for 30 years or so. Here was an FTP file, a password file from our FTP account that I had at Bell Labs, which had these hashes on the left. And if you looked on the right, they came out to, why are you wasting your time? And in fact, I got an alarmed call from AT&T security saying, someone has figured out your root password. And I said, well, what is it? And they said, why? And I said, oh, you don't understand. That wasn't the real password file. And in fact, there was no password. There was no way to do it.
Open sarsaparilla, open Saskatchewan, open septuagenarian, open saddle soap, open sesame.
So that was a security film from the 1950s showing a dictionary attack on the cave for Bugs Bunny. He took 5 tries. I don't know if you noticed, that was 2-factor authentication because you had to say open in a word and then flick your hand. And so he did that. So that's Hassan, by the way. First of all, why did he need to know how to open the cave? You don't tell the night watchman at a bank how to open the vault. But he knew it began with an S. He made 5 guesses in 13 seconds, or about 277 guesses an hour. And you can go through and look, and if he did all the S words in the English language in user-dict words, it'd take him about 3 3/4 days to try open everything. By the way, he was told, I didn't include this part of it, that if by his boss, that if someone gets in, he shall be fed to the jackals. I have a bit of employment advice to you. When you go out into the world, if you're in security, don't take a contract that has a jackal clause. It's probably not acceptable in regulatory environments anyway. Same with dynamite chairs, of course. So what can we do? Let's teach the users. Okay, let's have some rules. Intel says at least 8 characters long, 1 alpha, 1 numeric, 1 special, no spaces, they're bad. Cannot begin with an exclamation or question mark. I wonder why. They think you're going to type in JCL. Passwords are treated as case sensitive. That's an important thing to know. Dartmouth, 8 characters long, not 9, not 7, except on the way to 8, upper and lower case. No more than 4 characters in sequence, 5 different characters, cannot be found in the dictionary, including foreign languages. That means no Estonian words, folks. Cannot be a reversal of a word. 1 additional character, X algebra, not allowed to just change the numbers to look like letters. Cannot, JP Morgan Chase, this was back in 2019. 8 to 32 characters, well, that's pretty good. 2 of the following, upper, lower, special, different than your previous 5 passwords. That means they've got a list of your previous passwords, or at least the hash of them. Must not match your user ID. No more than 2 consecutive characters. So Shanan would be okay, but not with 3 A's. Must not use Chase. So my password of stupid Schwab would not be acceptable. Must not be a commonly used password. Now that's an interesting list right there. Bank of America, 8 to 20 characters, 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 number, note, repeat the same number letter more than 3 times, no spaces, and can have only those particular characters shown there. Wells Fargo, these are all American banks. 6 to 14 characters. So are you less secure at Wells Fargo because they do 6? 1 letter, 1 number, not contain 9 or more numbers. They're worried about phone numbers and social security numbers, I think. Username, you get the idea here. Special character may contain special characters, and they give you examples. They don't tell you whether space is in there. Citigroup, another one, another bank. length 6 to 50 characters, alphanumeric, password, case sensitive, 3 identical numbers, and change your password regularly. Mitsubishi, new password 8 to 32, spaces, capital, small, new password. How do they save the previous? These, I call these Eye of Newt password rules from the Shakespeare, where Eye of Newt is one of the things you mix in to do magic in Macbeth. Sorry, in the Scottish play. That you have to have all these different hard to type and hard to remember things just to make a search space larger. Use a different password for each account.
We have a
Change
question
your password
from Andrew.
frequently. Don't reuse your passwords. Don't write your passwords down, much less put them on a file in a computer. This is a nightmare. Eye of Newt passwords are easy to test and hard to type. Who's responsible for this? Well, maybe I am a little bit. Steve Bellevin and I wrote the first edition of this book, and it came out in 1994. And it was way more popular than we expected. They told us we'd sell 8 to 10,000 copies. We sold over 100,000 copies in, I lost count, something like 11 languages. We'd get 2 books in the mail and you look and say, is this Czech or French or whatever? And it turns out this book ended up really training the first generation of internet security people. There certainly were people who knew this before it, but this was the one that got people started. And I've received many nice things about it. Some people said, I read your book and decided that's what I want to do when I grow up, that sort of thing. And if I had it to do over again, I think I'd have included a couple more pages against Eye of Newt passwords in the password section. It might have actually changed the world. Any reason we can't use previous passwords? Well, that gets to password changes, and I'm going to talk a little about that. These rules come from the deep past in computing and security. About the idea about changing your password and not reusing them, that comes back from cryptography. If you read about the Enigma cracks in World War II, the Germans changed their password their key every day, because if you lose a key, that means that from then on, they can read everything that happened that day. So it's better to escape it. And isn't this the same sort of thing? If someone cracks your password, then maybe changing it will make things better. Turns out that's not how attacks work. If they can crack your password, they usually invade your account, open up other insecurities, and that lets them back in even if you change the password. Besides, good passwords are hard to think of, and people don't generate good ones at all, much less lots of them. But if you reuse the password, the thought is they'll go back and try it again. And of course, if you use one on Facebook, maybe you use the same one on LinkedIn and people go try. Then eavesdropping was trivial back days. The stakes were lower because, you know, we didn't have all the banking and stuff on the internet. And yes, changing passwords lost military crypto gear. So the other really important document was this one that came out of the Department of Defense in 1985 called the Green Book. And it had a whole bunch of excellent security suggestions, stuff that I went back and read and didn't really have much trouble with, but they did have one problem. In that world, we had time sharing, which means you had a computer terminal that connected to the computer through 10 characters per second line. God, is that slow? 30 characters per second, better, and the newfangled 120 characters per second access to remote computers on time sharing, which was lovely. And if somebody put a little PC or something on there and started trying passwords, how long would it take for them to guess, using a dictionary attack, your password? And they did the math. And at those speeds, you know, they said, okay, it should be improbable that someone could guess the password in 1 year at 120 characters a second. Okay. However, the threat model has changed. So if we do use the original, oh, come on. All right, I can't read my full screen, but that's all right. If we look at, they had several suggestions. 8 characters with full alphanumeric alphabet can now be cracked, well, actually, this is a few years ago, in 6.7 minutes, which means you need to change your password every 400 microseconds. This is using the math they used that made sense at 120 characters a second. if you have I of Newt rules, which means all those weird characters, including space, it makes it, you have to change your password every 31 milliseconds by their stuff, and so on. And this graph gives you an idea. The 12 character I of Newt actually, which is utterly impossible to remember, of course, actually takes quite a long time. And this is what they were trying to do. So you have the computer try as many guesses as possible, and that's a work factor, sometimes called entropy, though that's not technically correct as I understand it. And we can run these dictionary attacks using GPUs. And at the last time I looked at this, there were people claiming they could run 8 billion guesses a second through a GPU. There are all these doublings. Multiple core CPUs are great. If you're going to take over a grandma's computer, you can have her computer sit there cracking passwords and she won't know because the CPUs are basically idle. And can a human choose to remember a password a computer can't guess? So where do these security policies come from? Well, there's the DoD. There's a lovely paper by Florencio and Hurley. By the way, everything that Cormac Hurley publishes is worth reading. That the people like our bank have as one of their business goals to get the strongest passwords you can get away with without ticking off your customer. And this is a difficult balance. Fortunately, it doesn't happen. Does this work? Well, there's my ATM picture. See, those machines were amazing. It didn't actually have a computer screen. The original ones had a roll of like 12 messages on it, and it would roll the right message for put in your card, or your card is rejected, that sort of thing. Has it been working? Well, no, obviously not. Here's a list of the biggest password crashes that I did in 2018 by millions of passwords lost over the years. Marriott, Equifax, OPM, US OPM down there. That is, oh God, that was all the people with clearances in the US. Oh, it's a mess. And of course, this happens because the password file is taken, and it may just have the passwords in the clear. And what are the top passwords? Well, we know that too, because there are billions of password lists that have been released. You can go download them and look at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a surprise. QWERTY, password. By the way, I edited out the obscene ones because a lot of people like to cuss at their computer. More on that later. More top passwords. Here are some names. Football teams. My daughter's young man is a Liverpool fan. Fictional characters, musicians. So people violate the rules all the time. And in fact, I've had people come up and sort of use me as a father confessor. You know, Ches, I actually write down my passwords. And you know, that might be okay. That depends on what you're afraid of. If you have a little sticky note with your password right here, well, if you do that at work, someone could walk in and see it. If you do it at home, maybe someone would break into your house, but usually what would happen is your kids would get the password, or maybe if you're going through a divorce, that might be a problem. But if you're in sort of a private place, maybe it's okay. And of course, if you have really stringent rules, people fall back to the second password, the mother's maiden name, which is always less secure. I have a friend, Simon Byers, who has a Perl script that you give it a name and it goes out and it scrapes the internet in various places. He says he's got a 70% hit rate of finding the mother's maiden name for an arbitrary name on the internet. I asked him for an update on that. He hasn't given me answers on that. The problem is these rules make things harder for people, but they don't actually make it more secure. And none of these are grandma's fault. The users are not the enemy, says Ms. Sass, also a great one. By the way, I mentioned grandma a few times. The person I call grandma helped Seaborg and Oppenheimer discover new elements. She was she got her degree in math from Colorado. She wrote disk controller code for the UNIVAC one. She was not a dummy, but that doesn't mean she understands internet security. In fact, neither does anybody really. I remember one day I came home from work and it was late and I'd been doing some stuff on Amazon and I got a letter that said, your Amazon password has been compromised. And I said, oh geez, and I clicked on it and I started to type the new password. I said, wait a minute, Now, it had said something about your activity from today. Before I hit enter, I went and looked at the JavaScript and realized that I had almost given somebody else the password to Amazon. And it's just because it was late in the day. I was grandma in this sense of the word grandma. Fortunately, I could check it out, but it was, you know, this stuff is subtle. It is simply poor engineering to expect people to select and remember passwords that are resistant to dictionary attacks. User education is useful, but you know, you go to these security talks and they say, it's key to do user education. Well, not for this. Now, if you want a company to have a thumb drive plugged into one of its computers, you just scatter a bunch of thumb drives in the parking lot, and someone is going to pick that up, take it inside, and plug it into their computer. And that's the sort of thing user education is important for. But this password selecting stuff, not so much. Let's see. Oh, let's see. So in 2008, eWeek, a magazine I'm sure you all read, IT eWeek, listed the 100 most influential people in tech, in IT. And there I am, number 98. I'm a star. I'm ahead of Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. I'm not sure quite what he had to do with IT security. But like some Hollywood starlet who wants to save the whales, I said, okay, it's true. I'm a little famous. What could I do? Could I get people to stop doing this stupid password stuff? And that's where this talk came from. How am I doing? Okay, it's sort of on there. So there are 4 factors of authentication: something you know, something you have, device or something you are, biometrics, and your location, which can be helpful. If I'm buying a plasma screen in Latvia, it's probably not me. Okay, that's easy. And of course, we have access to that. So here's a very short course on work factor. This one, if I were giving this strictly to the League of Women Voters, I'd probably skip this. But here is a list of the 1,024 most common British words. This list is not secret. It is to the 10th or 120, it's 10 bits. And if you pick one at random, you have an entropy, I'll use the term that way, of 10 bits. Someone would have to search about half of those, guessing them to find yours. So for example, here I picked the word example. Now, 10 bits isn't very good. So how about we pick 2 words at random from this list? The second one is early, example early. Now I've got 20 bits of randomness. Well, that takes a little longer. It's not enough to handle GPUs. But you notice these words are words. You can type them. We've all been learning how to type English words, not I have newt things with zeros and special characters. I can type these quickly. So example early, 2 words. If we pick 6 random words, can you remember 6 random words? That's 60 bits of randomness. That is getting to be a challenge for nation states. That's a lot of guesses. And of course, 8 random words gives you Avogadro's number, a mole of work to do. And I like using the chemist's mole for cryptographic work. Gives an idea of how big it is. The number of atoms in a mole of an element. And Florencio and Hurley say, look at the required entropy. And they found Facebook and Twitter are about 20 bits, banks are 30 bits, government mid-40s and up. And I went through and tried to find words in the dictionary that you could tap on a phone, and if you were off by 1 letter, it could still figure out what word you typed, and it would be an iPhone-friendly word list. And here were some of these, which is an interesting idea. Yeah, we knew passwords were lousy back then. So getting back to the iPhone, I'm not sure where I cover this. It turns out, oh no, I do. I mentioned this a bit more. If we're using a dictionary, well, all right, I'll move on here. So here's some password ideas that I've been running through over the years from academia and me and others. Here's one, a past picture. Find some part on this photo and click it. And that has fairly low entropy. And it turns out this paper figured out that people tend to click the same places. But it's an interesting idea. You know, maybe you don't remember words very well, but maybe you remember location, and we'll get into that. Then there was past faces. And one of these ladies was my past face, one of my past faces. And there were actually 5 of them. And if I could remember those faces, not their names, which is important because I can remember a face looking familiar, but I don't remember the name with them. That you go through and you look at 5 screens and pick the person on each of the screen. That's a pretty good authentication technology. And what I did when this came out was I tried an account with it, and I tried a week later and it worked. And then I tried a year later, could I remember these faces? And the answer was not so much. But now I've seen them so much in this talk that I absolutely know them. By the way, these were students who volunteered their faces for this project for $1 a piece. Or how about deja vu? This is art, the same idea with the faces, except computer generated art. And of course, draw a secret. This is the magician-like hand waving that Google now has you use with Android. It's one of the things you can do. Sort of interesting. How does the user help desk help if you say, I'm trying my password and it doesn't work? And do you wave in front of the camera and say, this is what I did? And this, I'm not sure how that works, but it's an interesting problem. This is one where you look at distorted pictures of your own animals and you identify which one is which. So more ideas. One of them I liked a lot. Is this in there twice? Oh, here we go. All right, boom. And I actually made an app for this, was can we remember a place on the surface of the earth or on some other picture or something? For example, and what you have to do is remember a series of zooms. And in this case, I said, I'm going to go to Rhode Island. And I didn't get that. Shut up, Siri. We need a name for when your digital assistants wake up when they shouldn't. This on the left here, the zoom and tap, is an island in Rhode Island that I decided I could find every time. And up on top, that sort of rainbow thing, that is my entropometer. I've got 35 bits of entropy in that. And as I zoom in, I get more entropy. And I zoomed in, I said, okay, I've got this part, and I zoom in there, it's the house. Okay, I'm going to do the tree in front of the house. So I have a series of about 5 decisions that takes me from the entire world down to a tree next to a house in Rhode Island. And as you can see, that's 47 bits, which is a darn good password. And one could zoom into other things like the Mandelbrot set. Now, the problem with this one, of course, if I go back, if I can, hello, speak to me, Polly. Oh, great, my keyboard might be messing up. The other one, you might go to your own house or something, but you could zoom into the Mandelbrot set. Let's go out to the end of that little piece and see it. It's the first practical use for the Mandelbrot set I've ever seen. I don't know how usable it is. Can Joe Sixpack find his way around the Mandelbrot set? Oh, is this going? Okay, there we go. All right. Or you could zoom in on a calculus book. Let's go to page 170 and then zoom in to a particular equation and go down to a particular letter and go to the end of the radical over the U. And that has an entropy of 28. Yeah, it's an idea. Now, that app is not in the store. I've got that lying around. If someone wants to play with it, I'd be happy to give it to you to work on it if you're an app kind of person. But there's a service out there called What 3 Words, which divides the world into 8-meter squares. And if you pick an 8-meter square, it has 3 words that describe that particular location. So for example, if I go to the Rocket Garden at Cape Canaveral and go to the end of that missile, that little square is / retailing practical improper. And I leave it as an exercise to the student to figure out how many 8-meter squares there are on the earth and how many are separable, because something in the middle of the ocean you're not going to be able to pick apart. Here was the frog pond from my youth, hung intro dime, and a spot in the Adirondacks, trim ripe logistical. These are not bad passwords. I don't know what their entropy is, But this is a service that's out there now. And as long as no one's looking over your shoulder or watching your network traffic, this is not a bad idea. So more ideas. Cussing at the computer, because a lot of people do it. Ron Harden back at Bell Labs wrote an insult generator by processing things from the OED. And I have this service set up on my account, which does 42 bits of randomness and makes fresh insults for you. The fun thing is that these are insults. They're safe for work because who knows what the heck they are. And there's a chance to learn some new vocabulary. You objectionable puddle of encephalitic Marco Polo sheep thumb. There you go. There you can cuss the computer out. Now, that has a single quote in it. It has spaces. There are no numbers. So this is not me making all of it, but it's about 7 picomoles of work factor to break these. So can something you know be saved? I think so. And we don't have a choice in most cases. You really need to be able to have something. If you don't have your iPhone with you, we're gonna have to do these other authentication factors. But there are much better solutions. Limit the guesses. That's the ATM one. Lock the account, or at least slow down the tries. And we've had that for a long time. Multi-factor authentication. Authentication devices. These are devices, I'll go more. Words, password vaults, we'll talk about those. Faces, thumbprints, and other biological cues. I have, this uses a face. I've got another one here that uses my thumbprint. 2 of these use my face. Pretty cool stuff. Whoops, come back here. Did it go? Oh, okay. So, a device, a PIN, password, I talked about this. Your email password is probably the most important password you have because that's how they reset your passwords, right? So be careful with that. And a combination is harder to crack, even if the individual tests are weak. So I thought, the best sort of password is a challenge response. The computer gives a challenge, you give an answer. The soldiers used to use this in the war. You shout lightning, and the other soldier better say thunder quickly, or you shoot him. So the answer depends on what the challenge is. And I thought, well, what if we could have a challenge where a human could pick out some detail and give the right answer? This was an interesting day, an interesting period for me when I wrote this paper, because one of the thoughts I had was that, well, okay, one-time passwords are great. The equipment can be expensive, but can we do it in our head? Can Joe's six-pack do it in his head? I don't know what the Australian equivalent is of Joe's six-pack. It's an interesting question. Okay, watch this guy in the back, in the middle, touching his face, arm, chest, face. That's a signal. Yeah. Okay, good. That is a signal, a baseball signal. He is telling the runner whether to run or not, the batter whether to swing or not. He's giving instructions from the coach. Not a lot of instruction, but this is out there where everyone can see them. These are baseball signs. And by the way, if you know of other sports that have signs that are like this, I'd be interested in hearing them. He's transmitting a little bit of information, but hiding it with other things. Not all of these taps are important. There's one that says, the next thing I tap is it. And if I hit my arm skin after I tap my forehead, that means bunt. And then there's another one that's a wipe off sign that says, forget what I just told you. So there's this little thing you have to memorize. Turns out baseball players, some have trouble. The information can be vital to the game. Baseball players are not always the sharpest knife in the drawer. Babe Ruth forgot the signs 5 steps out on the field. But I thought, could we do an authentication based on that? Maybe they can obfuscate well. And it turns out human computed responses, they're tough. This is what I did for a while back in 2001 and 2. I'd have a challenge. And the challenge would be my username and the PID and the date. And I typed in a bunch of characters. And some of those characters were important and some were not. And you can see it's pretty confusing. well, how did I decide to pick the answer? And a couple of them I did wrong. The problem was, you can see towards the end, I mean, the fourth from the bottom, the answer was 4. Okay, that's where did the 4 come from? It's actually 2 digits added together modulo 10. And that has to be the last or third letter, whichever comes first, and the response. It was something like that. And so that's sort of it. Maybe this is pass authentication. Maybe this would be a good way to recover your password. But I don't think it's going to do it. So tokens. I gave password talks back in the late 80s. By 1989, I had been at Bell Labs for 2 years, and we used this device. And this thing cost about 20 bucks. Maybe it was 50, I don't remember. It had a 56-bit DES key loaded into it. The admin would never see it. So it was secret. It was in the computer somewhere. The user takes this and adds a pin, enters a pin twice. And then the challenge goes in, and you hit enter your pin, enter the challenge, and you get a response, and you type that. And an authentication, an actual login session looked like this for a computer that's long gone. I said, I'm Ches. It said, okay, 70202. I entered the pin, which only I knew. It said 04432234. I typed that in, and I'm in. This was much better than passwords. Now, I had to have the little device. It had to be working. We'll get to that in a moment. But I'm not having to do eye of newt or anything. It's very easy. And of course, it gets us out of the game. You can sniff it and it won't help, because if you don't get the same challenge, the response is not useful. And there's not nearly enough information in one challenge and response, or even a bunch of them, to figure out the 56-bit key. It was 20 bucks. Okay. So of course, this was another solution that was around at the time, the RSA Secure ID. And this had a secret in the key fob that was generated from a secret back at RSA headquarters. And the key was based on that secret plus what time it is. So every 30 seconds, that number changes. And you type that in, no challenge, you just enter the response. And the server has to say, well, your clock is off a little. That's okay, we've got that adjusted, and gives the answer. And I told people that Secure ID was an epsilon less secure than the other one. Why? Because there is a master secret back at RSA headquarters. And it turns out epsilon can have very large values, because around 2010, that secret was stolen from RSA. And the US government used these all the time. They suddenly had a panic because they had to go replace or fix this because the master key was gone. But people hate carrying these devices. By the way, I have one right here. I talked about Schwab. This is what these things look like right now. You want to see what my number is? I don't know if it'll show up. Probably not. Oh, there you go. That number will change. If you know my username, password, and that number right now, you can log in and look at my stocks. But in 30 seconds, it'll be gone. That's pretty cool that I can show the password to you and it goes away, and it's pretty solid. It's much better than passwords. I don't actually remember my Schwab password. My web browser has it. You have to have both. There are problems, but you know, I said you need to carry keys with your car. Why is it unreasonable to carry keys to your bank? People didn't like entering the response. And there's another problem with these. Oh, here's the RSA SoftKey. This is the iOS version, which gives you a passcode every 30 seconds. You enter the PIN and so on. Much better, because this thing is a lovely computer. It's a supercomputer. Actually, it's got more power than the Cray computer we had at Bell Labs in 1990. The great thing is you've got it. A bad PIN gives the wrong answer. Doesn't say bad PIN, just gives the wrong answer, which is kind of nice. With the SecureNet key, you could give it a choice of bad PIN means try again, and after 5 tries, erase the key, or just give the wrong answer. And we have smartphones with good security. There's the Google Authenticator on the left and another one, Symantec VIP on the right. And these are pretty rock solid. And since you've got the phone with you, Why would we use this other stuff? I mean, it's really hard to crack this stuff. All right, now I hit the key, come on. So another suggestion, less painful account locking. If I lock an account, if you enter a password twice and you do the same, you know, password, okay, no, wrong, okay, wrong, because maybe you mistyped the first one. If you type the same password twice, that shouldn't count as 2 attempts, right? Because it might just be typing. It's not insecure to say, you've already guessed that one, I'm not going to change my mind, and I'm not going to charge you for it. Password hints about the primary password gets back to that key I had back at the beginning. Here's one, I actually got a patent for this. I shared a patent for this. If you and your spouse share a bank account, you might have 2 accounts with it and 2 different logins, which is not a bad idea. If you forget yours, perhaps she should be allowed to say, this is my husband, and get some message from the bank and type and enter her password and re-enable your account for you, which cuts the bank out of the deal. Lock the account in increasing time limits and remind the user of password rules. That helps a lot. Oh, right, I'm not allowed to use spaces here. That's what I do when that happens. So you still want strong passwords. Okay, let's make them fun, or at least easier to type. And this gets to the XKCD, correct horse battery staple. By the way, I talked to Randall Monroe about this. Was correct horse battery staple. He picked 4 words at random. Were those the first 4 words he got? Turns out, no. He ran through a couple of them and said, this is the one I want because it reads better, or some artistic license or so on. Now, did he lower the security by doing that, by picking 4 different ones? No, he didn't. It isn't like he cut the space, unless you had some way of automatically deciding that his passwords, that these are the ones he would like and these are the ones he wouldn't. And if you need really high ones, so not user chosen, but you can veto. And I actually wrote an app to do that. They're going to write it down. And so this was an app I actually I have it here. I'm not going to show it here. It is not in the App Store. You give the name of an envelope, sample, and you're going to lock whatever's in the envelope with a password. So here's on the left, I've dialed a work factor of 80 bits. And down below, it used an English dictionary, and the 80 bits translates to anybody bold desires gentle Harvard probable roll. The idea is that this envelope would contain all your secrets, and you would have to memorize those 7 words. Now, after a few weeks, that would work. If you wanted to back off the work factor to 57 bits, you could go over and try association bomb Roman call consisting. It doesn't make sense, but you can learn to type it. And by the way, if it knows the word list, that means your login password can have spell checking, because finding that the words aren't secret, it's which word you're using. And if you pick another key, you are not reducing the security. Actually, if you pick another key, it's 2 to the 80th parens minus 1, not 2 to the 79th. You're taking 1 out of 2 to the 80th counts. And you know, we have different dictionaries here. The dictionary, if you have longer words, you could use fewer words. Absorb, church, represent, correct for 40. One dictionary is hex. You know, Peter Honeyman generated a random hex number, and that became his password. And he carried a piece of paper around with it on for a while until he memorized it. No, that's not so bad. Now, 40 bits isn't great, but remembering that, not so bad. And of course, here's one with 1K words, after 40, serve physical 10 south. This app lets you sort of play with how many words you want. And it's all equivalent to the same binary. And you can even go with Arabic. I don't know what that says, but it's from a dictionary of 1,000 Arabic words. And isn't it cool that iOS handles the right to left automatically? Because I don't know how to do that. So you can try different dictionaries. You can pick another key. If you don't like absorb, church, represent, correct, how about able, shun, mail sheets? for exercise for a student, if you rearrange the order of the words to make more sense, how does that lower the entropy? Go back to word factor of 80, notice it's green. I don't think the NSA can crack 80 very easily. A live conclusion scientist policies burden applications into. Remember, this is a password that unlocks all your other stuff. And here's some more, another serve strength. Trustees nationalism starts and blah, 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 Arabic. So if you do this, this is a password wallet. As I say, this app is sitting around in my account here. If somebody wants to play with it, I'm happy to loan it out or maybe even put it on GitHub. If you want to try it, and I suppose we could put it in the App Store. I don't promise that it'll work. There are all sorts of interesting security issues. Benefits, the security is not secret. You can use spell checkers. There are no fancy pants attacks by Dave Wagner or any other security gurus because it's just random bits. Wallet can be stored in a public place. If the key is long enough, you can lose your, and so on. There are a lot of assumptions as a client software. Secure rubber hose cryptography, that's another attack. So updated advice, how am I doing here? Okay, wow, it's pretty close to an hour. I have sort of three basic levels of passwords. I have one for one I don't care about, my New York Times account. If you want to steal that, it's okay. You can read the New York Times as me. It isn't a paid subscription. It's just some way they keep track of me. Inconvenient if stolen. You know, in the COVID era, we have the Amazon trucks come by the farm almost every day. Maybe that would be more inconvenient if it's stolen. But then there are bank access, medical records, stock things. Those really have to be taken care of. So write it down if you must. Write a reminder. Use variations to meet the requirements. And do note the required variations. And that's mostly what my notes are. These guys don't like spaces. Okay, I know what I do. Should you save your passwords in your browser? Well, so a lot of attacks take over your keyboard and watch what you type. And pretty much every password can get leaked that way, any typed password. But they make things easier. Then they're password vaults, LastPass and 1Password. I haven't chosen one of these. It would be helpful to have one I can share with my wife. I'm not sure which ones have the best security features or security history. I was going to propose that it'd be an interesting homework problem for you to go and figure out what are the top 6 password vaults out there and look up how they have done and come up with a recommendation of which one is probably the best. I'm open to suggestions, by the way. I'd like to have a non-moronic password rule. That's my engineering goal. Pick something a friend, a colleague, or hacker can't guess in a few tries, and they can't figure out while they're watching you type it. Don't be a moron. That's a sort of password rule, not can't be this, these letters. It's easy, obvious security rule that grandma can understand. Why can't I have a space in my passphrase? Good question, grandma. So I've given this talk to people who actually run banks and other things. Yeah, well, Ches, so there are problems here. They'll take time to deploy. We have a huge base. We have hundreds or thousands of these authentication servers. Who owns the thing you're using? Who hosts it? Are there third-party applications? Who developed it? The developer may be long gone. How does it work? If we break it, we break our whole business. What is the business function? We need to get buy-in, and what are the development costs? On the other hand, if you lose 50 million records because your passwords are bad, that should cost you billions of dollars in fines, if anything. I say you should fix it anyway, because this problem is not going away. And annoyed users are not cooperative. You get pissed off, you go back to stupid chase 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course, there's a large thing. So use multi-factor authentication. Laptops, I'm not so happy with for storing passwords because their operating systems are more open. The cell phones are better. I think iOS is better, stronger than Android, but that's debatable. And the weaker passwords work fine if you time things out. You can tell them number 98 said it was probably a good idea. Maybe that'll help. And by the way, the most common threats are not the dictionary attacks. They're keystroke loggers, phishing attacks. Hi, I'm your bank. Tell me your password. And password database compromise, which can happen lots of different ways. And that is my talk. Welcome questions. And how did I do for time? Wow, 61 minutes. Actually, 58, 56.
That was perfect timing. And with that, any questions? This is a wonderful opportunity that you won't get every day.
It's true.
And we won't get Ches every morning at 5:30. So ask up now.
Also, if you think of questions later, I do answer email. Apparently people in Melbourne are shy or sleepy.
Quite possibly sleepy at this hour.
I mean, it's like what, 8 p.m.?
Yep.
So they should be watching Heart Guy or Phryne Fisher movies or something.
Oh, there's one from Andrew.
Yes.
Do you want to say it out loud?
Well, yeah. Where would you expect to find a keylogger type attack? Well, the first keyloggers I saw, other than ones I installed myself for security, doing hacker tracing, were mechanical devices. You get a job as a janitor in your target place, and you've got this little device that you plug into the keyboard slot and plug the keyboard into it, and it records everything you type. And the janitor comes back in a week and takes it, and that memory gets emptied, and that does it. So there's the hands-on access. But you know, if someone has hands-on access to your computer, you've lost already. Really, it's pretty much all over. When someone breaks into your machine by the latest Microsoft bug, or you've clicked on the wrong web page and your browser's let up in, one of the first things they do is install something in the operating system that records everything you type. And then they can look at it. And of course, that's sort of game over for passwords. By the way, some versions also record everything you click and show a little piece of the screen where you clicked, which means if you had a keypad that you clicked or you pointed to a picture, that gets caught too. I've seen that. So that's one of the goals of taking over a computer, is doing that. And they're very common. Go Google for them and look around. There are a lot of people discussing this stuff. Good question.
Any others?
You would have seen this space like grow and change a lot since you were working in Bell Labs till now. I was just looking at Wikipedia, and that you worked on the internet mapping project. Do you think since that was first started, with the internet being so much bigger and more complex, the nature of that would have changed a fair bit now?
You're talking about the map itself or security? There are two different places to go.
The internet mapping project, in the context of today with the internet being more complex, how would that be different?
Okay, so the internet mapping project, I started doing daily internet maps in 1998 and collected all the data through 2011. By the way, that data is available out there. You can BitTorrent, you can download every trace route I did over those, 13 years. The internet got bigger. I'm not sure it's fair to say it got more complex. By 1998, it's a pretty big network. And of course, the mapping project was doing the middle of the internet. It wasn't going out to everybody's house or every one of 300,000 computers in a company or something like that. And the internet mapping project was designed to find topologies. Where are the connections? Well, to Iran, for example, which was a little thing. I mean, we just ran this thing. And then one day I said, we're having trouble with Iran. I wonder how our packets get to Iran. And I extracted all the trace routes for 6 months that ended up someplace in Iran and made a map and found there were two ways to get to Iran. One was common and one was rare. And I ended up showing this to a government official, actually Richard Clark. And I said, so this seems to be a backup that doesn't get used very often. And he looked at me and said, is this classified? I said, I'm just a guy from New Jersey running trace routes. I don't get to classify things. But somebody should want to have this. And he said, I've been asking for this for 6 months. But that's a connectivity thing. And the security aspects are, where might you cut the line and where might you tap the line? For those who are old enough to remember, in 1991, the Gulf War, there were bombs blowing up bridges across the river in Baghdad. And I've been told by people who did that planning that that wasn't to ruin morning commutes in Baghdad. They knew that there were fiber optic cables in those bridges and they wanted to cut them. And this is an old World War II trick. If you have wired communication and you cut them, they have to go back to radio, and radio can be intercepted. So that is a security aspect of that. And certainly the Internet Mapping Project was designed with security in mind. Where would we cut things? We ought to know what the landscape looks like. But of course, what goes over the lines, we never tried to look at that. We didn't know how busy the lines were, or certainly what the traffic was on them. And so a lot of the early attacks are still there. There are certainly new and very clever attacks now that we didn't see 20 or 25 years ago. The advanced persistent threats, they're persistent. A lot of them are not so advanced. I'm not impressed. It's okay, you did that trick. Yeah, that still works. They're certainly threats. I think the ones that bother me the most are the ones that are finding errors in CPUs. They're finding leaks in data. And this is a whole other talk, actually, about if you have a CPU running and the guy next to you has a CPU running, and you figure out a key, a cryptographic key, he can eavesdrop by looking at your cache or the power usage or other things like that. And this gets into tempest protection of computers and maybe down to chip level. And this is new and hard. And of course, some of the bugs in the CPUs and the chips, back in 1960s, Seymour Cray was building the fastest computers in the world. And he did various tricks in the CPU to make them run faster. And we saw some more of that. Those tricks have now been greatly exceeded and improved upon by people like Intel, the various instruction predictions and all that kind of stuff. But they're very complicated, and complicated means insecure. And we've seen that. You can look at several of the different attacks that are out there that leak data in different parts of the CPU. And those are new. But these password things, they haven't changed that much. This is still the same sort of attacks we've had, the same goals. There's a lot more money out there. And of course, this is now, we're now getting down to acts of war. When I remember in the late 1980s, I came up with a question: if I ping Finland, is that an act of war? Well, I'm just a guy in New Jersey. I'm not blowing up anything or something. But there were explorations I did that later on, some prosecutor friends said, you might be an unindicted co-conspirator on that. Just because it was so early that you couldn't tell what the ethics of it were. Is it okay or not? I was just thinking a few days ago, back in the 1950s before Sputnik, one of the questions was, if you put a rocket into orbit, is that violating the airspace of all the countries it goes over? Now that was sort of new and nobody had an answer. And I've even heard the story that Eisenhower delayed our first launch in the US, because he wanted, because if the Russians did it first, then it would be okay to put stuff over Russia. I don't know if that's making lemonade out of something, but it's an interesting explanation and it probably has a certain amount of truth to it in any case. So early on, there were lots of things that are going on. And in fact, a good part of my career through the 1990s, all this stuff was new, and law enforcement, all the spooks and all those people were trying to figure out what this all meant. I spent a lot of time teaching them and working with them on cases. I'm very proud of my work I did then. But nowadays, they're crackerjack sharp. They know all this stuff. They would know what the cases were at the time, and now they really know how to do this stuff. But it's open warfare on the net, and it's getting worse. I mean, it somewhat started with a sewage in a park in Australia, as I recall. There was an early early hack, but we're way beyond that now.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Anything else? All right. Well,
Wait, we got one more.
Oh, more. Okay, I'm going to have a little coffee. I've been skipping this. Yeah, go ahead.
So something that I have seen increasingly, particularly from Microsoft's advice, is to move towards like a passwordless infrastructure where the users don't actually have a password, or at the very least, they don't know it. And all authentication is through things like security keys, Windows Hello, Kerberos tokens, and like tapping a correct number on a phone type thing. What are your thoughts on that around like eliminating passwords entirely?
I think it's a great idea. It gets us out of the game. You don't have these stupid rules anymore. You have the security in a key someplace. I mean, this thing can store a 256-bit key if it wants to. That's resistant against anybody at the moment. And so if this is protected, client software is still important, then you can do that. And we're seeing it more and more. I have devices all over the place. And I am delighted when I go to a web page and it says username, password, and I tap and it says, oh, you want to use Cheswick.com? Yes. Shall I unlock the password? And I say yes, and I look at it and it knows it's me and it takes the password. In that case, that password can be arbitrarily difficult and I don't care. And I love it when that pops up. My problem right now is it doesn't always work with all the different iDevices. So I'm not putting it in the iCloud right or something like that. It's a little harder to understand what's going on, but it's much easier to use. And I think this is the wave of the future. It does mean that clever people are going to be able to attack those things. And it becomes a battle of clever people versus Apple. And that's important. Do you believe there's something more governments could do to improve our cybersecurity, or most of the responsibility on the users? Oh, Lord, or on companies for that matter. Well, the first part of the answer is governments should get out of the way. And this is not going to happen in China. This gets back to the battle of backdoors and stuff. If you make crypto too easy, then bad guys can have secrets that are not accessible to the good guys. Then we're going dark. And this is a concern. And I know law enforcement who likes to do this. Now, often they have other ways of doing it. And I'm not really too worried about going dark. I really want to have it so that this stuff can be really strong. But this argument's going back for 25 years now, if not longer, about about the government's doing this mandating this sort of thing. And of course, it depends on whether your government's evil or not. And you can decide for yourself which governments are evil and which aren't based on what. I am always distressed when I hear of a break-in. And what was the most recent one? The fellow who did it was interviewed in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was a lot of passwords lost. Oh, T-Mobile. T-Mobile dumped what, 20 million, 40 million accounts. And the guy who claims to have done it, and it seemed like he had pretty good proof that he had, said it was really easy to break in. You know, you can go back to British common law in the 1300s. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a tort. If you have all my data and you're careless with it, that's sort of like your snake crawling out of your backyard and eating my cat. I ought to be able to sue the hell out of you for it, especially if they're not trying. Oh geez, not Experian. What was the big, I never remember their name. The big credit union that lost all those records about 8 years ago.
Equifax?
Thank you, Equifax. Equifax hadn't updated their Apache web server. I'm sorry, if I had an undergraduate class and one of my students hadn't upgraded it and that happened, they'd flunk. And as far as I'm concerned, that is just too easy a thing. and we're letting them off the hook. Now, as I understand that they're now paying something like $700 million in fines. In my book, that's an order of magnitude too small. It ought to be, look, we're not even trying. We're going to lose a mess of money, especially for data I never gave them permission to have. So I think there's a regulatory issue here that could go and make it much stricter for this stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, defending this stuff is hard because you only have to make one mistake in the defense and the offense can win. On the other hand, it's about incentives. There used to be a email server for the National Security Agency called DocMaster. I don't know if it's still there. I haven't looked in a long time, but this was amazing. An organization that was so secret that a few years before its name was not allowed to be known, now had an email server. How did that happen? Turns out I talked to one of the two guys who did it. He said, we went to the boss and said, we want a public email server. This is why it's a good idea. And the boss said, if it gets hacked, you lose your job. Well, you know, when you're designing servers and deciding which software is right and how to configure it and stuff, having in the back of your mind being eaten by jackals or losing your job or having dynamite under your chair focuses and gives your answers very clearly on what choices you should make, how sure you should be, how you should check, and so on. And I don't see that in big companies. And of course, big companies are huge. This is such a problem. I co-started a company called Lumeta, which patrolled the perimeter of big companies. Because the idea of a perimeter defense, of course, is you have a couple of firewalls and this wall around it, and it keeps the bad guys out. It's like a castle, perimeter defense. And what Lumeta did was internet mapping of the company's network, so you tell where it goes, finds leaks in it just with routing. And I came up with a test using spoofed IP addresses to poke every machine inside the company to see if it could talk to the outside, not going through a firewall. Turns out that's one packet, very easy. You can do it the other way too. And those would be leaks. Those would be people somewhere out in the company that somehow can get to the network that are not behind a firewall. And it was very powerful. And you see cases where people, if they had run that test and they could run it now, it would have mattered. I think the South Koreans lost stuff because there was a leak in their network that the North Koreans got. I said, the leak detection would do that. Now, I started that company long enough ago that I think those patents have expired. Someone else could do those tests now too. But not all packet spoofing is bad. This gets back to the question of, is it an act of war? And, you know, does Leviticus discuss whether it's okay to ping Finland? It seems to be silent on that. So, so the other thing about improved cybersecurity, Mudge has worked on this and other people have done it. We have in the States, the Underwriters Laboratories. And if you have a toaster, you submit it to Underwriters Laboratory, and if it passes tests, you get their UL approval. And these tests are basically electrical tests. Is this going to catch fire? Does it meet our usual electrical standards? I would like to see that at least voluntary for every webcam, firewall, and so on, with a list of things. And checklists are not great, but there are some tests you can do in there. A whole bunch of questions. Can it be upgraded? If the company goes bankrupt, can it be upgraded, and so on? And get a rating on there that you could look for when you're at Costco or whatever, and you say, I want one that's rated A or A+ or something like that. And I think that would help, because the stuff we've got, you know, I've got a barn full of old equipment here. It's got software that hasn't been upgraded in 20 years. Something else?
Well, with that, I think we are probably at time. But if everyone could thank Ches for a really wonderful talk and for hanging around so long to answer all our questions.
Hey, I'm retired. I had nothing else to do but drink coffee. Thank you very much. This was fun. I don't get to do this enough. I missed it.
It was such a pleasure having you. And eventually, when it's easier to get to the post office and get stuff for you, there will be a package coming in the mail.
I'm much more interested in coming and visiting your country again. I've been at least 5 times. It's a wonderful country. And you know what I do in the cold winter is I say, you know, maybe we should have an apartment in Sydney for the summer, for January, and just sort of be bi-hemispheric. And that would be pretty cool. I don't know if we're actually going to do that. There are grandchildren involved, but it would definitely be worth it. Well, thank you all very much. This was a blast. I love doing it. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Okay.